All right, in part one, I said that rejecting the claims of organized religions is the rational conclusion from a philosophical perspective. But I also said that that I'm going to argue why this is not the rational conclusion from a political perspective. And this is because philosophy, in its safe, abstract world, may have the admirable goal of non-contradictory thinking. Politics, on the other hand, strives for what I would even call the higher goal of coming up with compromises that allow real-world people with diametrically opposed beliefs and interests to coexist with as little conflict as possible. So, am I saying that even though there's no rational reason to be a theist, non-theist politicians need to pretend to be theists, and Christian theists in particular, just because politicians need votes? And we all know that most of America's voters are Christians who won't vote for non-Christians. Yes, I am saying that. But it's just a bit more complex than that. So before anyone labels my position as simply that of a cynical defeatist, allow me to present my defense of the time-honored and beneficial tradition of political double talk and hypocrisy, or to cast it in a more positive light, the tradition of political compromise. All right, let's start by looking at the military's don't ask, don't tell policy on homosexuals. Now, from the philosophical point of view, this is contradictory, maybe even incoherent. I mean, because if gays are really all that detrimental to the military, they shouldn't be allowed to serve at all, even if they can be discreet about their sexual orientation. And conversely, if being gay really has no bearing on a person's military abilities, well, homosexuals should be allowed to serve under the exact same conditions as heterosexuals. But politically, this don't ask, don't tell solution was a great breakthrough because it allowed parties with nearly irreconcilable differences to come to an agreement that satisfied at least some of the major concerns on both sides. The military got to keep its prohibition on open homosexual activity, and gay military personnel became legally protected from witch hunts and accompanying dishonorable discharges. Or let's look at America's clean needles programs, in which addicts who are using illegal injection drugs can legally exchange their used syringes for clean ones. Now, philosophically, or at least in the abstract sense of the word, this is nonsensical. I mean, because we're taking this contradictory stance that people will be prosecuted for using illegal substances such as heroin. But if they walk into these clinics with used needles, and that's, of course, clear evidence of abuse, we'll not only turn a blind eye, but we're going to give them shiny new needles to shoot up with. But, of course, we better not catch them using those needles. Now, philosophically illogical or not, this hypocrisy does come with the societal benefit of reducing the transmission of AIDS. Now, this is a goal worthier than legal consistency. Or let's take the tension between China and the United States back in April 2001, when the pilot of a Chinese fighter plane died after colliding with an American surveillance plane. Now, this plane was flying off the coast of China in an area that China said was Chinese territory and American said was American territory, or international, that is. Sorry. All right, China said that until America made a formal apology for its crime, the 24 members of the surveillance plane would remain captive in Chinese custody. Now, America, in turn, insisted that its surveillance plane was flying in international airspace. The collision was the Chinese pilot's fault. He was flying too close. And now China was the one who was committing a crime by illegally imprisoning the American crew. Now, neither side wanted to back down and appear weak before their respective countries, but the problem was resolved peacefully thanks to linguistic ambiguity. So America's official statement said, expressed regret about the pilot's loss of life. Now, China took that statement and they translated regret as apology. America, in turn, just made no comment about the Chinese translation, and so the 24 American crew members were released. Now, I could summarize this exchange as saying, okay, America, we don't apologize because we did no wrong, but we regret the loss of the pilot's life. China, in turn, says, we're glad to hear you've confessed your guilt. America says, oh, whatever. Now, that makes, maybe you could say that makes zero sense in the world of pure logic. But in the real world of politics, it makes 100% sense in that it may well have been a literal lifesaver. All right, now many will point out that this the end justifies the means approach is dangerous. It can serve to rationalize all sorts of ethical horrors in the name of political expediency. And that is true enough. But the opposite mantra of saying that the means can never be justified by the ends, well, that's equally dangerous. Each situation needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis, weighed for all the pros and cons. All right, now when we look at the ends versus the means when it comes to winning a presidential election, note that the characteristics that we want from a president pull us in opposite directions, at least from my own biased, non-theistic viewpoint. Because on the one hand, we want a politician who is as intelligent and as rational as possible. And from my perspective, which I guess I'd like to call biased, some people might call smug, maybe both apply. Anyway, that means someone who does not believe that an ancient text full of contradictions and scientific errors and ethnocentric absurdities could possibly be the work of an omniscient and omnipotent creator. But on the other hand, we also want a person who will actually get elected, and once elected, who will lead effectively. And in a predominantly Christian nation, this means, at least according to poll after poll after poll, and I have my sources documented in this, I won't repeat them. Anyway, in a predominantly Christian nation, this means candidates must at least claim to be Christian, and preferably mainstream Christian, preferably not something like Mormon. Anyway, so for non-theists who would like to see fellow non-theists in office, electing a closet non-theist may be the best bet compromise. Now, I have a little tangent note here. And even though I believe being a theist includes a certain degree of being guided by delusion and wishful thinking, one thing that continually surprises me about people is how good we are at compartmentalizing our beliefs. So if being a theist could reliably be equated with a lack of rational thought in other areas as well, then I would think it's important specifically to have a non-theist in office. But I have to admit that I really have not found this to be the case, because thanks to compartmentalization, theists, it just seems like they can tuck this irrational part of their thought process into a small area, maybe dragging it out on Sunday mornings once in a while. And then they can just be completely rational in every other aspect of life. And, of course, being an atheist is certainly no guarantee that someone is rational in other aspects of life, or even that they're being an atheist for rational reasons. So, as long as I see that candidates have a sufficient respect for separation between church and state, their religious beliefs they just play little role in my decision on whom I'm going to support. Anyway, back on track. Let's just say, for argument's sake, that Obama's professed Christianity really is strictly just for political reasons only. If so, why? Why does he have to be so supportive of faith? He repeatedly uses religious imagery. He refers to helping others as the Lord's work. Promising millions of dollars of taxpayers' money to churches for his program called his President's Council for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships program. And then giving Rick Warren, the Christian evangelist who equates homosexuality with bestiality and incest, such a prominent role at the presidential swearing-in ceremony. Now, my own conclusion is that these displays of religiosity simply make good political sense when it comes to being the leader of a Christian-dominated nation. But even though I am an atheist, I don't think of Obama as pandering or selling out. I actually do admire the way he does not alienate the Christian masses, and at the same time even manages to harness their faith in ways that I see as mostly positive. Now I'm going to read an excerpt here from Obama's website. And note that when he talks about the Lord's work, he puts it in terms not of spreading this message that salvation comes through Christ, but about things like ensuring benefits for veterans, rebuilding communities destroyed by natural disasters, and working to prevent ex-prisoners from returning to crime. And when Obama talks about his President's Council for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships program, note that he spells out the terms in which separation between church and state can be maintained. All right, I'll read that in part 3.